This is the Acts 2028 podcast,
where two young Church of God pastors
discuss the challenges and victories we face in leading revitalization.
I am TJ Samuelu.
I am Brian Seidel.
I am in an urban context in Seattle, Washington.
I am in a suburban and rural context in Boise, Idaho.
I am in a liberal state.
I am in a conservative state.
My ministry background is in missions.
My ministry background is in youth ministry.
And yet we are both in our first lead roles.
To help God revitalize the existing church in the Pacific Northwest.
We are helping each other.
And you.
To truly live out Acts 2028.
Here we are again, back for another episode. And TJ, realizing this is episode 9 of season 2, which means we have one more episode until we have completed our second season. So here we are, 2 seasons in.
What? That's crazy. That just, it has gone fast. It seems though like anyone that's been a part of a podcast, they sneak up on you at times as far as like the frequency, especially when you're rolling them out. I know everybody has their own different way of handling them. I know some people will do them all at one setting and then kind of just release them. We've been doing it kind of to stay more current with the circumstances. We record them, and then release them in a short period of time, like within a week of recording it. So it does creep up on us. It does seem fast, but I can't believe season 2 is almost in the books already, man.
Yeah, so it is crazy. And I think, with that said, part of doing it the way we're doing it is to make sure that we manage our schedules and get them done on time so we can release on time. Which to say that, thank you for being flexible with me, because we were supposed to record yesterday and then we pushed it to today. But we actually, I don't know, I'll tell you now why we didn't do it yesterday, but because Tamarack, our ski area, opened yesterday. And so I literally took my kids out of school and we went skiing. So it was, I got some major cool dad points yesterday. For sure. And we had, it's a typical first day skiing. I mean, we're a ski family, so we go a lot, but first day out is usually always kind of interesting. And yesterday was interesting, but it was, a lot of sore muscles today and working through some equipment stuff and everything. But we had a good time yesterday into the Idaho mountains and up in the snow. So that was fun. But again, one of the reasons why I did that, not just interaction with my boys, but also just for my own soul, right, of sitting back. And it's hard. I don't know about you, but it's hard for me to sit in the office and concentrate and get work done and hear from the Lord when my mind is knowing that the ski area is finally open and I have not been up there. So, so some of that self-care, definitely played into clearing my schedule out yesterday.
Well, let me just say this part. I think, so there's a part of me that is Ukrainian from my mom's side and Samoan from my dad's side. But let's just say not only my skin tone and those things, I navigate more towards the island side. So I do water in the liquid state. I've tried skiing. I've tried snowboarding. Snowboarding felt a little bit more natural because it was more like surfing to some degree. But it was super crazy. I'm just going to say that I'm so much better with water than I am the snow. So I didn't have that temptation, but I definitely have some of those other ones. We've talked about those. We love to golf and those things. Although right now in the rainy west, it's it's kind of tough and soggy to get those rounds in. But I think that those are important things. And as we kind of navigate today's show, one of the things that we're talking about is, again, framing this is we came into established churches. And so there's some things, even though they've been established, how does this impact us as we've been in ministry already ourselves before coming into it? How are we intentional? How do we even ask these questions? Because truth be told, like I didn't ask all the questions about that when I signed up for this part where I'm currently serving. So just kind of sorting through those, knowing why stewardship, all those things, it affects and impacts your ministry. I mean, I think another one that we've talked about is, kind of just Church of God has been proactive as of late with the care initiative to making sure that pastors are more taken care of financially. That's another thing that is there. But, really just making sure that you are rested, that you're ready to pour into people, especially in a pandemic when, man, it feels like there's not enough to put out all the fires, and we want to be all those things to all those people, but sometimes it is just tough and you have to be at your A game. So maybe taking a journey to go catch some slopes or something like that, yeah, that might be it. I'll tell you what, it's not to clear it up for those that love snow. I'm not anti snow. We love snow and doing it. I'm just snow skiing and stuff like that. My first introductory part to skiing was one of my friends took me skiing. I'm fairly athletic, and so we went up another lift, and my first run I ended up coming down a black diamond, which I had decent balance and I was able to manage that. I just had no idea how to stop, and so I broke my wrist, my hand in about three different places. So that's a bit of my story to kind of lead in there. I'm not anti snow. I've not had great luck, and I do better in the liquid state.
So yeah, absolutely. And I will say I have experienced surfing one time and realized I had a whole different respect for that too. So again, if I guess if you want, if for our listeners, if you want to hang out on the ski slopes, talk to me. If you want to be, somewhere more on the ocean surfing side, talk to TJ, and you can golf with either one of us. Maybe we'll go together and golf with you. But no, this is really important. I think when we talk about today and about this topic, and because in pastor circles, church circles, like whatever, we have this unfortunate reputation, right? Of pastors either being in a church for 30 plus years or being there for, a few years and then leaving burnout, right? And resigning. And so again, ideally obviously the longevity is great, but if you don't strike gold with a church, right, and get to that place where you could be there for that long, then it seems like the only other alternative is burnout, right? Which we definitely don't want to do. So I think that's where we kind of think about that. And like you said, some of it plays into how you negotiate from the very beginning. I mean, some of these really big picture things like sabbaticals, and vacation time, and some of these other things that play into this to this strategy definitely are ones that are easiest to implement, probably at a time of transition of a new pastor or whatever it is. But I think they're at the same time to say is if you're in your place, especially even in an established church that doesn't have these types of policies, then it's never too late to establish them. And I think that's where we might even come to this to say, as we start out this conversation about self-care, routines, sabbaticals, vacation time, et cetera, it's not if you need it. Okay. The reality is if you are in leadership, especially in vocational ministry as a pastor or a ministry leader, you do need it. And so not a question of if you need it, but how it's going to happen, right? To make sure that you stay at a healthy place and that you can serve wherever God needs you to serve. Because when you're burnt out, tired, again, chewed up and spit out, that's not a good place to be for anybody, not for the church, not for the leader, not for your family. And again, the reality is nobody deserves your leftovers. And so much, either the church takes all of it and your family gets leftovers, or vice versa, right? You get everything in your family and the church gets leftovers. And again, we don't want either one of those things. So, as we think about self-care routine, I just kind of jotted down some things for us to look at. And when I think that we need to kind of look at it in several different kind of levels, I think one of them is just your daily or weekly routine of like, do you have times in your weekly schedule, to set out time for devotional time or just self-renewal or rest, those kinds of things. It's a part of the self-care routine is even for a lot of vocational pastors is just keeping a regular day off. And there's a lot of pastors that don't even do that. Right. And we think about, so again, kind of daily, weekly type stuff. Kind of next step back from that would be more of like a monthly, longer term type of strategies, right? Of things that you might do every couple months or whatever that might be. The yearly strategies, right? What are some of the things you might do once a year? And those might be things like vacation time and those sorts of things. And I think, and this is the hard thing when you talk about as a pastor, as a vocational pastor, it is your ministry, your calling, and we spiritualize it and all that, but it is also your job, and your church should have some, quote unquote, business type of things like a job description. You should have one of those, right? Vacation time, you should have that, and you should take it, and don't feel guilty about taking it. Right? There are some of those other things that go with just a typical job that we need to have in place in those. And like I said, then the biggest step back that I wrote down is kind of as big picture things like, like sabbaticals, right? And so that's some of the things I think we should think about. Is there enough to talk about there?
Yeah, more than enough. And let me say this part out of the jump. This is one of those areas that I am still developing, and that I'm terrible at, and aren't necessarily clearly defined as well. So this falls under one of those categories for me as we process through this of I'm speaking from a realness as I'm still trying to process this. Um, and I think again, part of that is going to be communication. Like you said, if you're building it after the fact, you kind of gave a reasoning why you'd want to do this up front. But if you find yourself already in place and doing some of those things, I think, having a relationship to where you can navigate those with the other leadership. We've talked at previous shows about how you would handle that, whether that is an elder or board of trustees or whoever it is that you work with, about making sure that we have those things. And again, this isn't just a Brian and I thing, that there are a lot of people that are talking about this specifically during this time. So there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of resources even through where we serve in the movement of the Church of God. And so I think that, the financial piece, like you said, sometimes it's like you said, you strike gold with a 30-year run at a church. Sometimes, even though you're there, it might not be healthy. Maybe you're holding on for some bad reasons as well. Like you just don't know what else to do, or you've had some hardships. And so I think when you said balance is really trying to find that to where people can do that. And those that maybe are serving in an existing church, but are getting closer to retirement, like that they can honor that they can step off the playing field. And that doesn't mean, I don't think when you get a calling, you're ever truly done. It just might mean your season and your ministry might change a little bit. Maybe, you are the one that is leading the golf, devotional at the local clubhouse and stuff. That just might be the case, but I don't know that we ever turn that switch completely off, because it's innate in us and a gift from God. So,
Absolutely.
when we talk about those things and as we roll into them, I am now in year 16 of ministry, and I've never taken a sabbatical. So, so I feel like now I'm jumping in. Hi, I'm TJ, and I have a problem. But it is a problem, like you said. I mean, if we don't acknowledge these things, if we're not cautious of them, we need to be aware of them. So, like historically, as I moved from ministry to ministry, there was always a pressing need, and there was always an opportunity to jump in. So even as I've served at 3 different churches in the time, there was always a pressing need to get to the next post, as opposed to even taking a respite really at that time. And so some of those, again, are from my experience of what I did. And so I would, just maybe build some of those things in, to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. So, yeah, right now as well, because we do have a good working relationship with our elders at our church. They've actually tasked me with reaching out and getting help for a self-care routine. So right now I'm in the process. I was telling you, Brian, before we got on air, that the assessment, actually, they saw the value in both Courtney and my wife, taking it together, so we could kind of understand how our dynamics have changed, because we went from being associates and having different stressors or different responsibilities, and now have some of those things, even if we've taken the test in the past, DISC and all those other ones. Are they still the same? Do they still apply? What have we learned? What has transformed a little bit maybe. And so we're looking at all those things and then tasked with taking it and doing it right. I'm not a big NASCAR guy as well. I know I'm really just not doing good with the sports, even though we're sports people today. But NASCAR, if we would look at that, is that the Indy 500, which is a huge race for sports fans, it's not a sprint. It is indeed the 500 laps. And in that, you have to realize that even though you're going full bore, like ministry is at the most of the time, you have to take designated pit stops, and they're calculated. They are to the point where you get new tires, you get new gas, and you have to stop so that you can get back out there and do the way that you want to do it, and that God's called you to. So I am learning these things. So I'm gonna flip it back over to you, because these are things that I've learned, but I will interject where that's been a hindrance for me. One thing that I've learned in this, because I haven't, was I feel that I'm most refreshed when I take 2 days consecutive to kind of get a rest. I have not done that here. I usually do like 6 days a week that I'm working to out myself. There's been days where I've been here 28 consecutive days at the church for something. And so really just finding that now and understanding it different. There's a different role. There's a different taxing on you. And that's just, yeah, that's transparency. So run with it, Brian. I'll fill in where I'm guilty maybe of some of these things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and you kind of alluded to it, and because we had talked before about, so let's start at the big picture and move backwards, right?
Okay.
I mean, towards that. So as you talked about, so sabbaticals. So again, when I came to Oregon Trail, I realized that again, at that point, I had been in full-time vocational ministry for 14 years. And I had never had a sabbatical, like a formal one. And per the, at Cloverdale, where you and I were again, where we both left, our last post before we came to our lead pastor roles, their policy was they had a sabbatical, but it was a very general one. It was like every 7 to 10 years, you got like so much time off. And I don't remember what it was, but it was kind of more of a traditional, I think that the traditional sabbatical, policies that I've heard of, right, is like 3 months off every like 10 years or like 7 to 10 years. And so that's been the kind of the standard, around times. And so when I came to Oregon Trail, I came to because I was due for one at Cloverdale, very like within the next year of being there. And so and at that point, especially just with everything God was doing in me and stirring in my heart and in my family and all those kinds of things through, for moving out of youth ministry into that associate role. And then, Oregon Trail come knocking and all those kind of things. Like I felt, I knew I needed a season change, and I felt kind of burnt out, like in a lot of ways, especially in the youth ministry stuff. And so again, those weren't necessarily, I mean, a lot of transition obviously through those years and through all of that. And so I felt like I really needed a sabbatical. And like, that was the first time in my life where I really felt like I did. And so that was kind of in the forefront of my mind when I was started into, talking with Oregon Trail. And so part of me coming here, and that was one of the things that I negotiated in my salary or as a part of my package with Oregon Trail, was that I would be granted a sabbatical after being here. And again, and I told them and we agreed on 2 years after I'd been here for 2 years. And so, cause I told them, I'm like, I get it. Like I'm coming in, brand new pastor, like we're going through all this hard stuff. I don't expect to get a 3-month sabbatical 6 months in. Like that's not a realistic ask. Like that was not, but again, we kind of mutually agreed that, okay, well, 2 years into this, we're going to see they're going to know if I'm their guy. Right. And to see what God's really done and how all that has worked. And then on the same side, like I'll say, I feel like, with a season change and with us moving and settled and moving through that I would be ready to kind of step back in 2 years. Right. And so that was where we said it kind of agreed in, 2 to 3 years that I would take that sabbatical and, or be granted that. And so, and again, Oregon Trail had no sabbatical policy before that. And so they agreed to that when I came on. And so again, fast forward right into we become a couple of years. And by that point, some of the, there'd been a lot of changeover in the church. The board had kind of flipped for a lot of different reasons, whether it was just term limits or just people that had left and resigned or different things. And so basically it came up to that, and I had to bring it up again because the majority of the board had either forgotten about it or never knew about it in the first place. Right. So I brought it up. And like I said, at first, when I first brought it up, I said, hey, I'm 2.5 years in here. We haven't, and this was part of what we talked about when I came. And so now it's time to talk about it, and brought it up. And I will say, and I remember it didn't really go over well, at first. And I think there was even, a lot of, but then the board, and literally it almost came down as like, well, if we agreed to that. And then again, and there were people that were around at that time and on the nominating committee that were still in the board at that time, and they vouched for that. They're like, no, we remember that conversation. You're right. Like, we did agree to that. And so because of that, but so what that did though, was it did open up the conversation with the board. And so just kind of like what you've said you've had with yours, it kind of, they had tasked me. They're like, okay, well, we need to come up with what it's going to be. And let's figure it out. Cause we don't, we need to figure it out. And at that point, again, we were far enough in, they saw the value of my leadership, and that God had called me here, and what we had done, and the sacrifices we had made as a family for the church, and those kinds of things. And so again, it was, as soon as some of them it was just out of ignorance. They just didn't even know what a sabbatical was. Right. And so for them, some of those board members, the more that they all kind of learned about it too, they were like, yeah, you really do need this. Like, we get it. And so with that said, so what we landed on then, part of one of my research and part of what I saw, and I called different people, did some reading and some different articles and books about it. And one of the things I saw was that the traditional, 3 months off for, 7 to 10 years, was kind of a poor plan for a few different reasons. First off, it was a poor plan because it's just, by the time you get to 10 years, and if your policy is 7 to 10 years, by the time you actually get around to doing it, it's going to be 10 or 11 years, right, before you actually take it, because there's never a good time. You always kind of push it off. There's always another, life event or big event at the church or whatever it is that's just going to delay it. And so by the time you get there, it's just too far apart. Like, people are too burnt out by the time they actually take a sabbatical, right, for that to be refreshed by it. The other thing is that the 3 months away was extremely hard on the congregation, right? And on, to have a void of leadership for that much time. And so, one, to have a void of leadership, also to have just financially, it was tough, right? Because if on a sabbatical, if they're paying you your salary while you're gone, plus, a lot of times the church will pitch in a little bit extra for activity or a trip or something like that through that time. And they still have to pay somebody to preach, right, and to lead or to fill in for you while you're gone. And so that's a huge burden on the church and on that side as well. And so seeing those things, I kind of felt the better trend would be closer together, but shorter time period, right? So it's not as hard on the church financially or lack of leadership time, but also that by the time that when it actually happens, that you are not, so burnt out that you're kind of, because, that you're just ready to resign. And that's what I remember in church growing up, just as a church member, and seeing that. I remember different pastors from the churches that we were in when I was growing up that would take a sabbatical, and every time they would come back from the sabbatical and resign. Right. And I think part of that, and I started to learn, I think part of that is just because we don't take them often enough. And so that, we what really should have been known was just to resign before the sabbatical, but the church, for whatever reason, didn't want to accept that resignation or admit, or the pastor didn't want to admit that that's where they were. And so then they're like, oh, well, let's, take a sabbatical and then everything will be fine. And then, when they're on the sabbatical, they realize that they really need to leave. And so, or they're just burned out beyond restoration. And so they come back and resign. So, which again, just does not look good, right, from either side. I mean, and talk about hard on the congregation, hard on your family. I mean, all those kinds of things. So where we landed was every 5 years, and it was 4 to 6 weeks sabbatical every 5 years is our current policy at Oregon Trail. And so, and with that is they did in our policy that you can add on up to up to 2 weeks of your vacation time if you have vacation time due as well. You can add on to that. So I did a sabbatical. It was about 3 years ago when I did it, and it was a month long. But I took 2 weeks of vacation on it, so I was actually off for 6 weeks. And to say that it was really hard in a lot of ways. And it was really needed, and I saw that for sure. And it was also right in the middle of our adoption journey. And so there was all of that was kind of played into it. And again, going back to just that specific time, but realizing that is I'm now, starting 2022 will be year 4 since that. And so realizing that I have another sabbatical coming up here in the next year and a half, which is crazy to think about that. But if we stay on that 5-year thing, so just bigger picture to say that. And like I said, that seemed to work, really well. And I think that it's healthy. And again, and now it's something that my board and church really is very much behind. And in fact, they're reminding me, where we're at, and they kind of set up into the budget as to set money aside for sabbatical. And again, for those 2 kind of main expenses outside of the salary is, paying speakers to fill in while I'm gone, as well as helping with whether it's a trip or activity or whatever it might be that I will do on the sabbatical. So to pitch in some extra money for that. So I feel very fortunate in that. But again, it's something that I had to fight for. It's something that I negotiated, right, and brought up, because the reality is, unless, again, you struck gold with a board member or a leader or a denominational leader or whoever it is that brings it up, like, nobody's going to bring it up for you unless you do. And so it's something that again, you need to kind of fight for that, because the reality is, again, that God told us to rest. God told us to be restored. And, we can't pour ourselves out for 20 years and not expect that we're going to, need some refreshment. Right.
So let me pose this question to you, B. Like, when was it that you felt over that journey? So you had a couple weeks and stuff. I kind of gave the disclaimer on just the short term, like, I don't really feel as rested if I just have a 1 day off. Usually, if I put 2 together, I can feel like I'm starting to reverse it and I start to feel a little bit better. So it's on that 3rd day, really, when I start to feel like rest is catching up. Like, I've kind of quieted down all of the chaos of the big city, so to speak. So when you were taking those weeks, maybe speak to what were some of the most beneficial. When did you feel like that was there? Because I can say, like, usually in burnout and some of those things that you just described, as I've been processing some of those things and looking at where that line is to not go across it, is those that are listening that may be wondering about that, if you come in and you find yourself like a change in what you do or your drive, like, so if you are the person that normally would put in like 60 hours, like you're saying, and you find yourself kind of shortening that window in the sense of, like, you just do enough to get by to kind of survive, not to be dishonoring to your church or your ministry, but you just find yourself like, I can only do this much, like your bandwidth is starting to shrink. That might be an indicator that you need something, or at least you need to reach out. And I know that was one of the things that, like you said, not to be campaigning for yourself, but no one knows how you feel, A, unless you're communicating that. And then B, oftentimes, like we said, in the makeup of our elders, this isn't something that oftentimes, unless like we just recently did since I've been here, had non-resident elders that can have pastoral experience. And so, like, if you don't have another pastor speaking into your congregation from that standpoint, it might be foreign, and it might not be, again, we talk about this at length, but you're coming to a new church that's already pre-existing, and this might not be a part of their heritage, and they might not even be aware that that's maybe why the last guy left. He just got burnt out. I mean, there's a lot of underlying things, but let's start with, again, going back to that first question is, when did you feel the benefit of it? Like, when of that, and I know you just alluded to, you had adoption and stuff going there, but when did it kick in and you start to feel the benefit
Yeah.
of it? The refreshed word
So
is what you said.
yeah. So I will say the first week or 2 just felt like vacation time. Right. And so again, it was still kind of, but still the same kind of thoughts, even that you do on vacation, right? Like, I need to jump to that email. Oh, well, like, and again, and I kind of set some boundaries up for myself, because I knew that, like, I mean, I like removed my church email from my phone, like, I mean, some things like that to make sure that, excuse me. So I had removed like my email. I had set up those things where I knew I wouldn't have responsibilities through that. But there was definitely a decompression time, right? Just like I said, because I'm just used. I mean, I think we're all used to just going so fast, so much, right? And doing that. And so So yeah, I mean, literally it took me a couple weeks to just kind of get to the place where I felt like I was actually taking a deep breath.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, and again, and realizing that I didn't have like a sermon coming, 2 weeks out or, whatever it was. And so, to where I think just my mind and my heart, and my body realized this was more than just vacation time. And but then in that, like through that time, I think probably too, so that week, like 3, 4 was just kind of really, really important for me, just because that was where, like I said, I was able to really, really relax in my soul and like to really seek the Lord. And again, not seek the Lord for what's next in ministry, but just my own soul and my, like at that time. And I'll tell you, like, and those first couple of weeks were hard too, because like I mean, it was January, like after, and again, part of that was when my wife and kids were on their Christmas break. Like, I think the first week of it was where, and so we just, again, it just felt like I was on vacation with my family. We were home, but then when they all went back to work and school, and then I was kind of home for that second week by myself, and like that, just the days felt super long, and like boredom, and like kind of like what, but it took me to, again, it was so opposite of what my normal life was, that it just took me some time to really just let those walls down. And so, and which is why I feel like that a month is just not long enough, for that, because you need that decompression time, and just to realize that, man, like, what am I really here for? And again, in that time I had planned, and I had planned out with my board, and we had set that there was time for rest, and recreation, right? There was time, as well, for family time. And then there was also time for some research, some long-term research and stuff. And so part of that, and I think those are all important things, right? And so, like I said, that the first week was just a lot of time with my family because they were home, and so that was kind of, we got that piece in, I kind of at the beginning. And then the last part was rest and recreation, and again, it was in the winter, so I did go skiing, right, and by myself, several times, a couple of times, just random days in the middle of the week. There was times I went with just some of my buddies, right, and some other pastors or whatever, and skied with them, and hung out. One of the other things I did was I interviewed, some different pastors, and I think there was, and I don't remember how many were. It was like 4 or 5 that I went around different churches, different size church. No, it wasn't even that many. It was 3 pastors, actually, if I remember that. That I went and like had lunch with, and like I asked them all the same questions, but they were all like different size churches and in different phases. And that was one of the things, was I talked with one church that was like at the same size as us at us Oregon Trail at that point. I talked with one church that was like the next phase of growth. It was like, the next kind of growth hurdle size. That was a couple hundred bigger than us. And then I went, and I also interviewed a pastor that was in like 1,000+ church, just kind of more of a, I guess in our IO standards, more of a mega church type of environment. And so, but I asked all of them the same questions, right? And I had those pre written out, and, and was able to work through their answers, and just things that I was seeking the Lord on for Oregon Trail, and some different stuff there too. So, and I think every piece of it was super valuable. But I think that's the thing, is I think, especially, and at least part of it is my personality, but I had to go into it with a plan. And I think if I didn't go into it with a plan, it would have just, would have either worked the whole time, or it would have accomplished nothing, other than sleeping in every day. So, yeah, that's the way it went. Like I said, for me, so that, and now we've actually made it, like, adopted the policy, again, as we've been moving forward to it, that it's a minimum of 6 weeks, for it, just because I realized like a month is just not long enough, to really do that, especially with it being, 5 years in between it. So,
Did you notice that it benefited the family as well? I know you said you had some family time, and I know sometimes, like you said, we can steal from one to give to the other, and those things. I know, it's shocking sometimes we have so much rattling on our brains. Either our attention span or our patience can both run thin at times. I think everyone's maybe kind of been there. Was that beneficial to the family?
so I would say, and definitely, right. I mean, then just them knowing that I was home, right, for 6 weeks. So that was, definitely different. And I think it was good. Had some good time with each of my kids and, with Maureen. And like I said, we were in the middle of the adoption thing. So we didn't have Claire at that point. But so it was, I think one of the hard things though for us was just because, and we talked about in earlier episodes about how involved our families are in the ministry and the church. And so that was actually part of the struggle with it was through those times, like my family still had service things and responsibilities at Oregon Trail. And so they still went to church at Oregon Trail. And I think that was during that whole time. And so that was part of the hardest thing for us was, and again, and I mean, I just went and attended different churches, for those 6 weeks. So I went to church, but I just went as a churchgoer to churches. Some of them were the churches I interviewed and I went to their Sundays and that was part of that program. But there's a couple of Sundays too, where I just went to a random church and by myself, right? Because my whole family went to Oregon Trail and they had their responsibilities and things that they did and fulfilled. And so I mean, yes, it did benefit my family. I think that dynamic, and again, even at that point, that only a couple years in, I don't even remember exactly how far in it was to us being at Oregon Trail, but it was still at a pretty fragile state, and so it was a place where, where again we could replace me for those weeks, and the board, committed to that, but we couldn't replace all that my family was doing, and so they did go back, and so that was kind of weird, just the way it was, and I think, and that was hard for me too because they would come home from church, and then and I'd have to purposely be like, don't talk to me about what's going on at church, right? Like I can't hear that because it's just going to push me right back into, to work mode, right? And so I had to kind of fight that.
Okay, so pivoting a little bit more, we've talked big things that are out there because that's kind of more of the, I know I use the pit stop analogy, but that's more of like if we were looking at more of like an engine overhaul, right? Like
Yeah.
that's more structurally, if you're a car guy, that's going to be like the engine swap kind of thing, that the chassis, your soul, those kinds of things stay intact, but you put some mileage on it and you got to swap it out. What about as far as like, pivoting a little bit more to the self-care piece, what are some of the ones that you have in play? And so I've kind of gone through this as well to kind of talk. There's a church just north of us that's classified as a mega church. That's a Church of God, like you were just talking about. And once a month, they have a self-care day to where they just email their executive pastor, say, hey, here's what I'm doing. They go to the San Juan Islands as an individual, and that is part of their work schedule. They are required to take a day alone with God once a month. So they have that in their structure. So they have 12 of those days annually that they do that they seek that are more frequent, as you said, in a touch point, not
Mm-hmm.
as long, obviously. So they're meant for a different purpose, more of that respite piece. And then there's another one when we were just at, Fairfax in Virginia, and they do 7 sacred Sundays, right? So 7 sacred Sundays, they aren't doing what they normally do. And so we're looking at this again, how this impacts us as senior or lead pastors. But also, one of the dynamics we're keeping in mind here is that if we have a staff, we may have a youth pastor or someone like you were at that part, that we may have to also step in on their behalf to help in that point. So there's some of those things. But in the 7 sacred Sunday piece that was modeled was, um, if you are a value in what you do, 7 Sundays a year, you wouldn't be doing that. So if your role is as a children's pastor, that you would be volunteering or helping some other way. That might be even, like you said, going and visiting another church. That might be if you guys do outreach and you do missional work, both locally and globally. That might be that Sunday you go and serve that ministry that you guys partner with. And so that if you have value to us in the church, you would also have value to those that you'd serve in that capacity, so that it's a transferable thing that they would be able to use that. So 7 Sundays out of the year, you're also not doing what you normally would do, to give you a different perspective, to not get you so mundane or caught in a rut and some of those things. So those are a couple examples of things that just recently, as I've been looking through and sorting through those, that 2 churches in the Church of God movement that I've been aware of, that they handle that. Both are bigger in nature. Obviously, they allude to that they have some staff, but what would you do, and what would you do for the self-care element of that as we transition?
Yeah, so like you said, if we looked at, so with the big picture stuff, then we talk about like a yearly, like you said, like a monthly, weekly type of thing, or even a daily self care routine. So yearly wise, one of the things that I've found and I've done the last several years. In fact, I think I've done it every year that I've been at Oregon Trail. I first did it even at Cloverdale, and part of it was just me seeking the Lord on what was next in my life, but I go on a spiritual retreat, and so it's kind of turned into now, especially as a lead pastor, where I mean, I have staff, but we talked about that. They're not all full time and those kinds of things. So again, there's a lot that I cover. So I do it yearly. I think ideally I'd like to do it probably bi-yearly every 6 months, but just realistically with my young family and the church, it just doesn't happen. So, and I have to fight for it even a year. But so I do a spiritual retreat, and I usually do it in the fall, kind of after, again, my wife's a teacher, after the kids are in school and she's back in school, and we're kind of into this regular, usually like October, November type of, time frame, and right before we get into holidays is typically when I've done it. And so I will go off for anywhere from 2 days to 4 or 5, and however I can fit that in there. And again, I've gone up to a cabin in the woods. I've just gone, gotten a trailer and camped by myself, or whatever, just to get away. Again, it's out of town usually, but again, being in Idaho, I just kind of go up in the mountains, and and do that. And I take that time. And again, I go up, usually that's when I plan out my sermons. And we've kind of talked about that. I literally plan my sermons a year in advance, or my teaching plan. And so I do that at that spiritual retreat. I usually take a couple books that I just want to read, because again, I'm by myself, right? And I get these days. So and I just, again, for those, the last couple of years I've done it, it has been like a camping type of deal. So just get a trailer and go up and, to a campground or to some people's property or whatever it is, and just be there by myself, and spend a lot of time in prayer. Like when I've done it, I take, like, I've done like a fasting day, like one of them, I'll go up there and I'll just fast for a day and pray. Like I said, read books, do a lot of journaling, a lot of prayers on my Bible devotion stuff, research into these sermon series, and kind of plan out the next year. Um, so again, it's something I have to fight for. And so, but that's like a yearly thing. And so I have those things to do, again, kind of weekly, monthly, types of stuff for me. Some of it is just my own, finding those things that I'm able to unplug my mind and my heart from just church life, and just to take a deep breath. And so for me, those look like ski days or golf rounds, right? And I kind of, cheat the office hours by that, and just kind of take those days when I do that. And usually those are, and again, just like you kind of described from that other church, right? Of where they have those that day once a month. And again, to take that time, of, just to get away and just not be doing church stuff. And like I said, for me, and we've talked about it before, for me, again, you have to find what those things are. Like I said, for me, that, like, it's, it's a round of golf by myself, or even with a couple friends, right? I've just went all, the only thing I have to worry about is the next shot. Right. And so for, the 4 hours that I could take out of a day to do that is really refreshing for me. So definitely that yearly spiritual retreat, taking, not being and don't feel guilty about taking those days, like on a monthly basis, or just even when you need it. Right. Again, there are times where I feel like, man, sit down, like, it's just not happening today, like, do that, like, I've just got nothing, Lord. And times it's like, again, even if it's like, okay, we'll go home and take a nap, like, or whatever it is, right? I mean, you just kind of follow that and get replenished. And then, like I said, one of the other things, as far as I kind of smaller picture down there, one that I found for me that's really important, is to take a day off every week, and to really protect that day off. And where I try, and for me, it's Fridays, where I purposely try to do nothing church wise on Fridays. And I just literally block it on my calendar. And if anybody wants to do something, like, nope, like, that day's tied up. And again, they don't have to know why, right? But again, you just have to protect that, right? And so Friday, and like you said, 2 days off to back to back. Yeah, and I agree with you, as far as is even way more refreshing than just one day. And so, but that doesn't always happen. But I take Friday, Saturday, and in fact, I've had, again, board members, church people too, that have brought that up to me. They're like, man, every other job gets 2 days off back to back. You need that too. right? And so, a lot of times Saturdays get hijacked with church stuff. And so, but there are but I try to fight, and I fight for that sometimes, so where I take 2 days in a row. But like I said, there's sometimes where I'll take a day in the week, just like yesterday, right? Was kind of a mental health day for me, right?
Right.
Just going
Well,
skiing.
or one of the things that I think that you have to be cognizant of as well. This is again me outing myself is Mondays are my day off. And so like I come off of a Sunday and then I kind of get a rest, to catch my breath. But oftentimes I've noticed now, um, more often than not, a lot of the holidays will fall on a Monday. So then I don't take a Tuesday off. I just run back in. And so like I've noticed my office staff and stuff will be like, you aren't supposed to be here now. And, inevitably there'll be the justification, just like our sin of like, oh no, we had Monday and I have things I got to get done. And so again, that's a self-awareness piece that at least I know where I've gotten close, that you got to be able to make sure that you adjust accordingly. And so you might not even think of it in those terms, but again, once you learn those, you'll be better prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think to pull it back, I think then we think about even daily routines, right? Of things in office, your own personal devotions. And I will say, I think that's one of the things that I've really found for myself, and I've really tried to speak that into my staff as well. Is it's really important that you do have devotional time just between and prayer time between you and God that is not connected to your ministry, right? That is not connected to, again, for us again, especially if you're a preacher, like it's tempting to have to just use your devotions as your sermon prep time, right? And you're like, well, yeah, I'm in the word and researching and seeking the Lord, and you are, right? But it's a different thing, right? Than to just truly have your own devotional. And so that's been one of the things that I found has been really imperative for my own spiritual health, and just for self-care, is to make sure that I have a Bible reading routine or a devotional routine, that I stick to, that is not connected to sermon prep or or any type of program preparations.
It's good. It's good. Yeah, we got to do that. I mean, I think there's always some kind of thing, and really, I think one of the words, and we talked about this with the elders or board of trustees or whatever that is, it's really having accountability, and not from an unhealthy standpoint of, we talked even in that context of that episode of being board led or church led or whatever that is. But if you don't get it there, at least get it like, like we're doing right here between another pastor, another friend, that you can kind of have some of those things of, how are you doing? Have we done this? Have you taken this? I think that those things are great in accountability, because if you have that, then you're less likely to get close to that line. I mean, I deal with a lot of things, and when we talk with people, it's like help. The terminology I'd use would be like help put a lot of filters in place, so you have to blow through 7 stop signs before you get to the end road, right? So just making sure that we're aware of those. I mean, I'm sure we could go on with this topic forever, really, with a lot of things that we should do, we ought to do, but really, this is modeled straight out of the word. I mean, we preach this from the pulpit. There is a Sabbath. And if you are preaching on that Sabbath, and if you're doing and meeting the needs of your flock on that day, you have to take a day to be able to rest. I mean, it's what we tell people to do. How hypocritical of us to do counter to what we preach, right? I mean, I know that that sounds crazy, but I know that we all do it at some point. So making sure that you
Yeah.
do that, because really what is established is when you have a healthy pastor, you will have healthier communities, and you will have healthier opportunities to engage. So, man, I know being here on on the mission field of Seattle, I've encountered that I need that probably more, that connectivity that you spoke of, whether that's a personal devotional piece, because I'll lead our staff through one weekly when we meet for staff meetings, but still having something that's independent on my own, and some kind of enrichment where you're seeking God, not just for the purpose of the next sermon, but to have him speak to you in the still small voice, that you've quieted these things enough that you can hear that still small voice. Because one of the
Yeah.
ways that I would describe that is God is there, he's with us, right? So he might just be trying to, as he's holding us up, whisper in our ear. Are we at a point where we can allow him to do that? Are we too busy with that noise that he's right there and he's ready to just whisper in our ear, and we're not receptive to that? So anyhow, great words today as far as like things to think of. I know we could go a lot of different roads, a lot of different avenues, but it is something that you need to put on your radar, um, for obedience to your ministry, to your family, to the calling that you have. And so hopefully, as I'm learning from this as a student, that we would, we would take our own advice and that we would implement these things so that we can serve those and love those that we have afforded to us in the best way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great word. And I think just, just the thing that's running through my mind, even as you're talking about that, is I think one of the biggest pieces that I know I have fought and had to come to terms with, and I think I've, heard from others as well, it is the guilt of taking that day, right?
Oof.
Or or the guilt that we feel when we actually take like a week's vacation, right? That we rightfully have, right? Or whatever, but we feel guilty about it. And I will tell you, if you're listening to this, do not feel guilty. Don't like it, because you do deserve time off, right? Again, your job, like nobody else understands what your job is like, right? Because they clock out and then they come to church. Right. And that's not true for us. Right. And so again, to feel that like we have to clock out and go away from church. Right. And so to have the same experience that they do. And so definitely with that said is like, don't feel guilty. Right. And again, if somebody said like, yeah, that person, it's always like, oh, pastor only works one day a week. Oh, he's off playing again. Like you have all those things, right? And just say it, and just so people will be like, okay, thanks. Or again, they call like, again, I'll tell you, this is my stand on the line when somebody calls like, oh, well, this is really important. I got to do it on Friday. I'm like, sorry, Friday's tied up. Right. And like, literally, that's my only explanation. I'm like, nope, I'm tied up on that day. Now they don't have to know that I'm going to the golf course, or they don't have to know that I'm going to, whatever it is. It's like, nope, sorry, I'm tied up. I can't do it then. And don't feel guilty about that. So take your vacation time, take your day off, take your sabbatical, right? Whatever's there. And again, and fill these routines into your life so that you can serve for the long haul, right? Because this isn't about just going as hard as you can until you burn out and stop, because unfortunately that's the pattern, especially among pastors. And so don't fall into that trap.
Absolutely. Do it. Let it. That's why they're there. Just have the communication with your leadership. I'm guilty of it. I've got almost 4 weeks on the books right now currently. So I gotta start to do that. So anyhow, thank you guys for joining us this episode, and we're glad that we're here, in my instance, for this week to be a example. But thank you, Brian, for helping lead us through some of the things and the value. And if you are there, or if you're a leader in a local church, help love on those that love on you in a meaningful way. I think it just impacts not only our local communities and our church in a better way, but it also impacts our kingdom. So keep it first. Keep Jesus the subject, right?
Acts 20:28. So guard yourselves and God's people. Feed and shepherd God's flock, his church, purchased with his own blood, over which the Holy Spirit has appointed you as leaders. The Acts 2028 podcast is a broadcast production of In His Grip Publishing. Our theme music is Achievement by Giovanni Bruno. We'd love to hear from you on our social media accounts or through email. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram at Acts 2028 Podcast, or send us an email at acts2028podcast@gmail.com. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, leave us ratings and reviews, and even give us your email so you can be notified of new episodes. Thank you for listening, and until next time, we hope that you will lead wherever God has put you, and together we can all live out Acts 20:28 as we serve in the established church.